You see the screen? Screen's fine, yes, no. See the text, because this... All right. Okay, well, I just felt like reading Absolute Knowledge. In case anybody doesn't know, I posted this. You can look at it later. This, I will tell you. I'm also streaming on YouTube, by the way, if you guys don't know. You have an echo? On YouTube, can you hear an echo? Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. On YouTube, can you hear an echo? Okay, so it's not me. There's no echo on YouTube. Okay, anyways.
Sorry, did you ask me something?
No, like Ozu was saying that it was an echo.
I don't hear any.
Yeah, it was him. Anyways, I don't know if you've seen it, but I did post that new thing on Absolute Knowing on the Attention channel.
Okay.
Antonio Limonetto on YouTube. Don't read it right now, but if you do read it, know that I wrote that in complete ignorance of what this chapter actually says. Which normally you don't want to trust that, but I am extremely confident about what I wrote there based on just some like simple tells that are in the preface, the introduction, and what happens at the end of Force and Understanding. And like my knowledge of the general logic from the science of logic, knowing how that works, I am extremely confident about what this actually is, and I would be willing to bet money on it. But I have never read it, so I'm like, well, I ought to read it.
Yep, let's stay on the same.
So, yeah. This is the first time I'm reading it. I was just reading it for like the last hour and a half, writing at my commentary as I'm going along. But so far, not unintelligible. I am finding my bearings. So, don't expect too much of this. If you're confused, I'm probably confused. So, ask questions on the side chat or on the voice here. Suppose I should just link this as well. Oh, that's not it. Anyways, let's just get going with it. So, absolute knowledge, phenomenology of spirit. The spirit of revealed religion has not yet overcome its consciousness as such, or what amounts to the same thing, its actual self-consciousness is not the object of its consciousness. The spirit itself in general, and the self-differentiating moments within it, fall into representation and into the form of objectivity. So, well, right before absolute knowledge, the last chapters is religion. You can guess which religion finishes it off. He doesn't actually go by name, but he makes it pretty clear it's a Christian religion. And the object of Christian religion is obviously God, the Christian God. But Hegel has a very unorthodox interpretation of that, especially in the Phenomenology of Spirit, where things are very, very abstract, more abstract than usual. Since it's still a form of consciousness, there's still a sense that whatever consciousness is dealing with is not itself. So that's why he says, obviously, religion is a self-consciousness. It is a self-conscious subject, conscious of something, but it is not self-conscious of its own self-consciousness regarding the consciousness of the Absolute, the knowledge of the Absolute. So its actual self-consciousness is not the object of its consciousness. So it's all still within the structure of consciousness. Even in all of self-consciousness, in the entire book, there's a whole section, self-consciousness. It's a big one. Actually, well, it's only about a fourth of the book, but, I mean, that's pretty big. The other sections are much bigger. But even self-consciousness is always really just a form of consciousness. It always treats the thing that's dealt with ultimately as other to itself in some manner, even when it doesn't profess to believe this. With God, though, that one's pretty obvious. So, consciousness usually doesn't think itself to be God, so it doesn't. So, if it cognizes or thinks about God, it doesn't hold itself to be thinking about itself. So, the spirit itself, in general, and the self-differentiating moments within it, fall into representation and into the form of objectivity. So, God is still just. In that, God is like the ultimate subject. We are just objects ourselves. That's my assumption. Don't quote me on that. But he says the content of the representation is the absolute spirit, and all that still needs to be dealt with is the upheaval. Upheaval is Aufhebung, otherwise called sublation. The upheaval of this mere form, or rather, since this form belongs to consciousness as such, its truth must already have emerged in the configurations of consciousness. So God is the absolute consciousness. So in religion, we have the right content. God is the absolute. But it's still lacking in that it's only representational. There's only the idea that God is something, someone else. God is not really absolute. It's mistaking God as a being among beings. There's all that problem. But nonetheless, that content is the right content. This is something that people, including myself, have. Most people have issues. Even Hegel scholars, and which they're like, that can't be the case. One of the atheist Hegel readings that really is decent is this, that they're like, look, man, the method does not allow this. Every content and form, it's a unity. You cannot have the content without the form, and you cannot have the form without the content. So what is Hegel talking about when he says it's got the content but it doesn't have the form? That just can't be possible. This is Hegel cheating, basically. And if you're a stickler for the method, yes, it is cheating. But when you deal with it in the structure of consciousness, no, it's not cheating. The content is there. The form is just wrong. Of course, because the form is wrong, you haven't gotten the full, complete content. But the content and its aim is there. It is understood that God is the absolute, that this is the all-encompassing. Therefore, that is true. What is wrong is that this is limited to a certain form, the man in the sky, blah, 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 a book or some rules. That's the problem. But like what it's aiming at is entirely correct. So that's what he means when he says the content is right. It is the absolute spirit. It is the absolute. But the form is wrong. So the form of representation has to be upheaved, has to be negated, has to be upheld, but also uptaken. So since this form belongs to consciousness as such, which this whole entire thing has dealt with up to now, its truth must and this is interesting, it says, its truth must already have emerged in the configurations of consciousness. So representation has already been dealt with like long, long before. So the fact that representation needs to be upheaved, well, it's already been upheaved in a certain way. There are entire forms of consciousness. There is at least one entire form of consciousness that deals with this. So this overcoming of the object of consciousness is not to be taken as the one-sided process in which the object shows itself as returning into the self, but is to be taken in a more determinate way. Thus, the object as such presents itself to the self as vanishing. So, the upheaving of it can't be that consciousness upheaves the object back into itself and negates it. If you check out the self-consciousness section, that's where it begins. It's all about desire negating the whole everything else and proving that everything else is nothing, that it is only for self-consciousness as self-consciousness desires. But that can't be happening here. We're long past self-consciousness. The objects can't work that way. You can't upheave God into yourself that way. If there's going to be a coherent, harmonious relationship of upheaving the object itself, God must come into unity of its own account with us. The absolute must come into its relationship with us, just as we come into relationship with it freely. That's found in the preface already in the introduction. So the object as such presents itself to the self as vanishing. Vanishing is all about becoming. But more than this, it is the estrangement of self-consciousness that posits thinghood. And this is Hegel reflecting. He's telling us, well, we already know that the object of consciousness, which is the consciousness, is self-consciousness. Every object is nothing but the estrangement, that's another word for alienation, of self-conscious as a structure projected as an object. And projected here is not like, a fake projection. It's like quite literal projection. A thing put, thrown outward. So self-consciousness that posits thinghood in its estrangement, and this estrangement has not only a negative but a positive meaning. So the very process of estrangement itself is something, and has it not only for us or in itself, but for self-consciousness itself. So there's kind of a triple relationship ongoing. There's the knower, the knowing, the known, and the knower and the knowing are generally collapsed for most of the book, as far as I'm aware. But there is that distinction occasionally. Knower, knowing, known. The known is the object. The knowing is obviously the process by which it's determined. And the knower is the subject, consciousness. So for self-consciousness, the negative of the object, or its self-upheaval, thereby has a positive meaning, or self-conscious knows its nullity of the object on the one hand because it estranges its own self. So for self-conscious, the negative of the object, in total is self-conscious that holds itself to not be the object or against the object. But the negative of the object really, since the object of self-conscious is itself, so the object itself also self-upheaves. It also has its own negativity in itself. You learn this in Self-Consciousness, Chapter 4. So it has a positive meaning. It's not like, just negated to nothing. It is upheaved. See, self-conscious or self-conscious knows this nullity of the object. So the object is not just merely an object. On the one hand, because it estranges its own self, and you can read that both ways. It knows that this object is a nullity. One, because self-conscious knows that it has estranged itself into the object, so the object is not really this independent thing. It is just its own self. But also it knows the nullity of the object because, well, the object estranges its own self too. So the object undoes itself as an object. It upheaves itself right back to self-consciousness. Typical Hegel, like multi-layered wordplay. So, for in this estrangement, it posits itself as object, or in virtue of the inseparable unity of being for itself, posits the object as itself. So, in being self-conscious, I make myself an object. Or you could also reverse, as he says, I also posit the object as myself. He says, in virtue of the inseparable unity of being for itself. I mean, take it quite literally. What is self-consciousness? It is consciousness that is for consciousness, right? So it is, if consciousness is being, what is for being? Being. So being is for itself. Easy peasy. So if it is for itself, then we know it has a doubled reflection of its own self. On the other hand, this positing contains another moment as well, namely that self-consciousness has equally upheaved this estrangement and objectivity too, and taken it back into itself so that in its otherness as such, it is at one with itself. This is the movement of consciousness, and in this movement, consciousness is the totality of its moments. And you can see this in the entire Phenomenology of Spirit, right from Chapter 1 in Sense Certainty. All that's ever happening is that you have the structure of consciousness. It estranges or projects itself as a thing unconsciously at first. It thinks it's dealing only with the thing. Then in dealing with the thing, it realizes this thing is just kind of just a... It seems to... There's a problem with... How do I put it? So there's the thing. The thing just taken to be an object objectively. That's independent, whatever. You try to know it. You end up having an issue. And then consciousness reflects back onto itself and says, okay, there can't be a problem with the object. The object is the reality. The problem must be with me. So then the focus goes from the object to the... which is the known, to the knowing of the knower. And then we find that the knowing does the exact same thing as the object. You have the exact same structural problems. If the problem with the object is that it's supposed to be immediate and you just keep finding that it's mediated, and you say, well, the problem is that I'm the one mediating with my concepts, but then you try to look at your own process of trying to be an immediate thinker, and that also is mediated. You just have the same thing, and you just go from like the problem in terms of the object shifting to the epistemic standpoint of knowing, and then you see that same problem arise but in the form of epistemology. And then ultimately you stand back on the whole thing, you realize this whole thing is just one system going back and forth. That's a dialectic. You know, if in sense certainty, it's that you have the you just have the thing, this here now. These things are mediated by like language, universality, so they're not sensuous in the way that you think. You shift to knowing. Knowing is also not immediate if you treat it immediately, because then you have concepts like this, here, now. A this is only meaningful insofar as it's not another this. A now is only meaningful in that it's not another now. And a here is only meaningful insofar as it's not another here. So these are all mediated anyways. And so what you have but then the immediacy of the universal is just identified with sensuality. So the sensuous itself is mediated, which makes it universal, but the universal is mediated with itself because the here is just related to the here, the now is related to the now, the this related to the this, and immediacy just means for that form of consciousness sensuousness. And so you just go back from sensuousness, universality, sensuous universality, and what do you end with at the end? A sensuous universality, which is what's called perception, which is also called determinacy, because that which is mediated, which has a this which is not that. That's exactly what determinacy is. Determinate negation, call it. That's where like upheaval first appears. So perception is the totality of those two moments of universality and sensuality, insense certainty. So when he says this positing contains another moment as well, which is the third moment, it's the speculative moment. So you have the dialectic and then you have the speculative third moment, which is the upheaval of the whole thing. This positing contains another moment as well, namely that self-conscious has equally upheaved this estrangement and objectivity too. So the knowing and the known both get uptaken, taken back into itself, so that in its otherness as such, it is at one with itself. So this process of alienation or estrangement and then the return, projecting the object, going back to the knowing, going back to the known, that's all the process of consciousness. He says this is a movement of consciousness, and this movement consciousness is the totality of its moments. That's the entire thing. So hello to anybody who's viewing on YouTube. We just started reading Absolute Knowledge of Phenomenology of Spirit. So if you have questions, go ahead and let me know. This is the first time I'm reading it as well. So go ahead and watch me figure things out. So he says, equally, consciousness must have entered into relationship with the object in accordance with the totality of its determinations and have thus grasped it in accordance with each of them. So this is just a structure of epistemology and ontology. Insofar as there is an object and I believe there are objects, the ways that I relate to that object are in accord with that object. If I'm a physicalist, a materialist, and I think the only things that I have before me are material, the only way I'm going to understand them is through material relationships. So my knowing will be material too. Likewise, if all that I can know is material, the only things that I will know are material things. So that's the accordance of the determinations of the object. So that's all that means. So this totality of its determinations makes the object in itself into the spiritual essence, and it becomes this in truth for consciousness through the apprehension of each of its individual determinations as a determination of the self, or through the aforesaid spiritual relationship to them. So the object which consciousness ends up having is just consciousness itself. But it does not know this at the beginning. And it does not know this up until here, at this point of the book, at the very last chapter. Before that, it just holds everything to be mistakes. But the object in itself is the spiritual essence because it's the entire dynamic of the structure of consciousness itself, and consciousness is spirit. Every form of consciousness, sense certainty, perception, understanding, consciousness, reasons, ethical life, all these other things. These are all forms of consciousness. They are themselves the objects of themselves. So that's why the object is the spiritual essence as the totality of its determinations. And it becomes this in truth for consciousness through the apprehension of each of these individual through the apprehension of each of its individual determinations as a determination of the self. So consciousness has to go through this whole process of going through each part of the object in all of its forms, these forms of consciousness, as well as within each form of consciousness. And since the object of consciousness is itself, and it is the self as consciousness is just another word for knowing. Let's see. So consciousness is only just another word for knowing, cognition, call it that. Hegel uses a bit of technical differences, but it doesn't matter too much. Since ultimately, to know the object is to know myself, and the unity of my consciousness and my, which is the form of my knowing, is what sets up the very structure of what it is to be an object. That's why the unity and determinations of the objects are the determinations of the self, or through the aforesaid spiritual relationship to them. So my own relationship as a knower to the known is itself structuring my own selfhood and the selfhood of the object. It's the same thing both ways. Let's see. Mr. Dagger's Gaming, I was curious about absolute knowing because allegedly it is the Hegelian parallel to enlightenment described in mystical traditions. Yes, but also no. Because Hegel does align himself with that. He says, like, what people call mystical is what this is. Except this can actually be understood, whereas what most people call mystical, they don't understand, including the person who's had the experience. Let's see. Erdi says, hear me out on this. Absolute knowing bakes in the self-closure of reality thing that's required for the substance as subject conclusion. Of course, you're going to get that closure if you insist on the knowing which knows itself. Well, you don't have to insist on it. That's just the case. I mean, it's trivial. Like, Hegel's not the first one to like really arrive at this problem. This problem like surfaced from the very beginning. It's just that nobody had just made the solid connection that this is essential to what the structure of consciousness is, that all that you ever do is just project your own consciousness. I mean, with Kant, this gets pretty damn close. Because Kant's whole structure is, well, my structure of knowing in a way has to limit what I can know. I can only know what my own structure of knowing allows me to know. But he does not thereby then consider that the structure of knowledge is what is being projected as the things that you believe are even possible to know. Therefore, how you structure your object is also how your knowledge, how your conception of how you know will be structured as well. So anyways, don't pay too much mind to the 788 paragraph. It doesn't really set up very much. It's just kind of like getting into the summary. And this does end up summarizing quite a fair bit of the Phenomenology of Spirit. But it is not going to be essential to know a lot of the details. A lot of it is just formal. If you ever look at the absolute idea in the science of logic as well, a lot of it is formal. It's just... what it is the pure form of what you've been doing the entire time. So 789. Thus the object is first immediate being, or a thing in general, which corresponds to immediate consciousness. So now he's going... So if you notice, so in 780 he said, it's actual self-consciousness, not the object of consciousness. He says, since this form belongs to consciousness as such, its truth must already have emerged in the configurations of consciousness, talking about the representation left over in religion. So now we're going through what have we done so we can find out where this upheaval of this form really comes in. So he says, thus, the object is first immediate being, or a thing in general, which corresponds to immediate consciousness, which is also sense certainty. So this is just a formal look at the object in general. So in the prior paragraph, right before it, we're talking about the structure. First, the process of how consciousness posits objects. Second is how the structure of these objects is also the structure of itself. So the object is first immediate being, or a thing in general, which corresponds as a form of consciousness. So here's the mere object, which is just immediate being. The corresponding consciousness is immediate consciousness, which is called sense certainty. Secondly, it is a becoming other of itself. And by the way, this is a mistranslation on his part. He puts it as, he lists it first, second, third. That's not what the original says. It's like, it just says part. The object is in part immediate being, or a thing in general. It corresponds to sense certainty. In another part, it is becoming other of itself, its relationship or its being for another. If you are for another, you're in relationship to another. That's what relationship is. Becoming other also sets that relationship, and being for itself, which is the determinacy. Because if you're related to another, you are this, that is not that, and that's what determinacy is. And that corresponds to perception, as I said. That's where determinate negation, determinacy, upheaval first appear. You have a thing with properties. And In the final part, thirdly, it is essence, or as a universal, corresponding to the understanding. So an object is immediate, it is related or being for another, which is mediation, and it is universal. So the immediate you can call the singular or the individual. The relationship you can call mediation, and the universal you can call self-mediation. Or rather, I messed that up. The immediate is the singular or individual. The relationship is the particularity, because you have a this and that, and both of them are thises. And then you have the universal. So individual, particular, universal. Notice something interesting here in the second part. So the first one is its immediate being. It's got one determination. And the second one is its essence or universal, which mean the same thing. In this book, he doesn't make that big of a deal about like keeping these terms particularly strictly apart. People take essences to be total. People take universals to be totalizing. Therefore, same thing. By analogy, they're analogously the same thing. So essence and universal here are not really distinct. But being for another, so in the second one he says becoming other of itself, which is also another way to say relationship or being for other, and being for itself. So you have the first part, and then the second part is two, and the third part is one again. So what is that? What is that? How many is that? That's four. That's not three. That's four. What's going on, Hegel? Everything's a triad. Don't you know? Actually, no, it's not. It's very rare that... Actually, what? Okay, it's not that rare that he lists four things, but it's extremely rare that he says it's four outright. And he only explains this four, which is a tetrad. In the science of logic, like at the end, and some are probably in encyclopedia logic as well, like because it explicitly comes up in judgments, because judgments he can't escape that it's at the top level four. But when things are like four in the middle, he doesn't really tell you, and you just kind of got to figure it out. But that's an interesting thing. Insofar as it's being for another, it's doubled as being along with being for itself, and that's part of the second moment. Yeah. Okay, man. Mr. Urdi, I don't know what your problem is. You need to get a life, buddy. Listening to things that you disagree with and arguing online is not a healthy thing to do. That's why I only do it sparingly. And believe it or not, you might think that I'm a very argumentative person because you see my shitpost videos commenting on other people's bad arguments, but I rarely do that at all. Most of the time I'm just kind of just doing nothing, just zoning out, I suppose. So that's the process: individual, particular, universal. He doesn't talk about particulars here for whatever reason. I suppose he hasn't worked that out in the phenomenology at that point. He finally figures it out somewhere in the science of logic. So the object is as a whole the syllogism. And syllogism here is... I don't think he ever explains it. He just mentions it like in Force and Understanding for the first time. And he just kind of drops that, and he says, like, oh, well, here's a syllogism, consciousness and appearance and the in itself. And you're kind of just supposed to figure it out intuitively and go like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. And yeah, it's intuitive. It's just the individual... Let's check this out, actually. So I got 2 pennies here, if you can see. So you got this individual, but insofar as it's an individual, it's not all these other things around it. But as a thing, as a penny, it's just not another penny. It's an individual penny, singular. But once you relate it to another penny, because it's not another penny, it's within the unity of just like absolute penniness. This penny and the other penny, they're both pennies. If I ask you, give me a penny, whichever one you give me, it's all good. But these both exist within penniness, let's call it. The penny as such, the universal penny, and they also are just as good as that. There are particulars within it. So the determination is, between like the abstract negation of a singular, the determinate negation of particulars, and the absolute negation of this particular. They both come together as the universal penny. That's basically the simplicity of it. And you can reverse it as well, that you have like just the general abstract penniness, which then you put a split and you get pennies, particulars. Then you split these apart again, and you get the singular penny. It's determination either way. So the object is as a whole, the syllogism of the movement of the universal through determination to individuality. And determination is just that process of negation. And also the reverse movement from individuality through individuality as upheaved. So upheaved here in like the negative sense. Or determination and back to the universal. Which is concretization in both ways. And you can see that as concretization or abstraction. And it's just a matter of perspective. It's the same structure. So it is therefore in accordance with these three determinations that consciousness must know the object is itself. So the object is these things. It's singular, individual, or individual, particular, and universal. And since the object is also consciousness, therefore consciousness must also be that and must know in its way that. However, it is not knowledge as pure comprehension of the object that is in question. This knowledge is to be indicated. The reason why that is, it is not knowledge as pure comprehension of the object that is in question, because the phenomenology of spirit is not a question of what is pure knowledge. It is a question of, how does knowledge appear? What is apparent knowledge? And what is apparent knowledge? It's consciousness. So the object in question is not pure knowledge, it's consciousness, which is only apparent at this point. So this knowledge is to be indicated only in its becoming, or in its moments on the side that belongs to consciousness as such. So consciousness is not yet certain about what knowledge is. It's only working towards knowledge, so that's why consciousness is the becoming of pure knowledge. And we're dealing with knowledge in its moments on the side that belongs to consciousness as such. So, and the moments of the concept proper or of pure knowledge are to be indicated in the form of configurations of consciousness. Up to now, the forms of consciousness are not aware of each other. So you have sense certainty, and you have perception, you have understanding, you have self-consciousness. Each one of these takes itself to be the entirety of the world. They don't pay attention to the fact that there are other forms of consciousness. So they don't have a meta-reflection about consciousness itself. So that meta-reflection belongs to us as phenomenologists. But that meta-reflection is the one that's actually conceptually proper. That's where the dialectics are happening. That's where the upheaval, the Aufhebung is happening. That's where movement is happening. So for this reason, the object does not yet appear in consciousness as such as the spiritual essentiality that we have just affirmed it to be. So, we know this about the object, but consciousness does not yet know this about the object. And the attitude of consciousness towards it is not the consideration of it in this totality as such. So if the object is consciousness, which it is every time, unknowingly, the totality of what that object is, which has turned out to be all these forms of consciousness, it's not being considered as a whole by consciousness in any singular form. So it's not the consideration of it in this totality as such, nor in its pure conceptual form, but is in part a shape of consciousness in general. So as far as object goes, there actually is a form of consciousness which is just pure object. Hegel will go on to it in the next paragraph. I'll just spoil it. That form of consciousness is called observing reason. So in part, all that consciousness acknowledges is not the totality. It only, which is the conceptual form, but only acknowledges the part of the shape of consciousness in general, of objects as such. In part, a number of such shapes which we bring together. So this is our part as the phenomenologists. We lay out where we may show a consciousness, like, look, there's other forms of consciousness, and they are sub-objects that we bring together, but the consciousness at this point does not do that work of developing each form of consciousness, developing each object from each other. So in which the totality of the moments of the object and the attitude of consciousness can be indicated only when resolved into its moments. So you may have the whole display, the panorama of all the forms of consciousness, but it's not yet clear just from that these all form one singular object. They have to be shown, and it has already been shown throughout the phenomenology. And this is the point in which we're going to basically look over the whole thing. Hello, hello. Can you guys hear me? Magnum. Can you guys still hear me here?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can hear you.
All right. Right, sorry, it dropped on YouTube for a second. Anyways, let me know if what I'm saying is understandable, because it makes sense to me. I know what I'm saying, but I speak in a highly compressed vocabulary, and I've gotten used to it. It's the curse of jargon. So please ask questions otherwise. So 790. So for this aspect of the apprehension of the object as it is in the shape of consciousness, so the object itself, so when the object is itself as object a shape of consciousness, we have only to recall the earlier shapes of consciousness that have already come up. Thus, in regard to the object, insofar as it is immediate and indifferent being, we saw observing reason seek and find itself in this indifferent thing. That is, we saw it to be equally conscious of its activity as an external activity, as it is conscious of the object only as an immediate object. We also saw observing reason at its peak express its determination in the infinite judgment that the being of the eye is a thing, and in fact a sensory immediate thing. Let's see. Let me know if it dropped on YouTube. All right. So in observing reason, we have the being of the eye as a thing, and in fact a sensory immediate thing, because that's what's immediate to consciousness. Consciousness does not yet take thought to be the immediacy, but only the senses. So because of that, if somebody says, if or when the eye is called soul, it is of course also represented as a thing. It's represented. Because it can't be presented. It's not an object of the senses. You can't bring it out and show it to somebody. It can only be spoken of and represented as a thing. But it is an invisible, intangible, and so on thing. Therefore, in fact, not as immediate being, which is what observing reason believes the thing to be, and not as what is meant by a thing at all, by that definition, that it has to be an immediate thing of the senses. So, with observing reason, it may, when it's presented with the claim that the I is the soul, that judgment, taken as it immediately stands, is spiritless, or rather the very absence of spirit. So it takes it, well, that's not a thing. That can't be an I. But in its concept, it is in fact the height of spirit. So in the concept, emphasis on the in the concept of the soul, because just saying the soul means jack shit, and just giving a set of qualities to the soul doesn't do very much, as we all know quite well. Nobody's convinced by that. But in its concept, it is in fact the height of spirit. And this interior of the judgment, which is not yet present in it at the point of observing reason, it hasn't been worked out and developed, is what is expressed in the two other moments to be considered. So, the thing is I. In fact, in this infinite judgment, the thing is upheaved. In itself, it is nothing. It has meaning only in the relationship, only through the I and its relationship to it. Indeed. So, so the thing is supposed to be immediate. For observing reason, the object is an immediate object. But if the object is the I is only in knowing, because the I is consciousness. Consciousness is that which knows another. So it has a relationship internal to it. So the thing is I requires mediation, which already upheaves. It already goes beyond. It cancels the immediacy. Turns it into mediation. So this moment has emerged for consciousness in pure insight and enlightenment. Things are simply useful and to be considered only in their utility. Now, I'll be honest, I don't know what he's referring to there. I'm not sure which form of consciousness that belongs to. I mean, that's pretty obvious that there is such a form of consciousness, but I don't know which one. Haven't read that much. But don't worry about it. The cultivated self-consciousness, which has traversed the world of self-alienated spirit, has, through its estrangement, generated the thing as its own self. Therefore, it still retains its own self in it and knows the dependence of the thing, or it knows that the thing is essentially only being for another. Or, to give complete expression to the relationship, that is, to what alone constitutes the nature of the object here, the thing counts for it as a being for itself. It proclaims sensory certainty as absolute truth, but it proclaims this very being for itself as a moment that merely vanishes and passes over into its contrary, into the surrender to being for another. Okay, there's a lot of noise coming from outside. Let me go close my window. Never mind, it's not the outside, it's somebody just vacuuming. So, okay, sorry about that. So, alright, so this is continuing observing reason. So, immediacy is cancelled. Things are for the I in relationship. This moment has emerged for consciousness and pure insight and enlightenment. Things are simply useful and to be considered only in their utility. So a thing is only for me. Okay, that makes sense. So this is still part of observing reason, all of it. So the cultivated self-consciousness, which has traversed the world of self-alienated spirit, has, through its estrangement, so useful is utility, pragmatism, basically. And by the way, it's no coincidence that pragmatism is essentially empirical and like just kind of like thoughtless in that way. Even someone like Charles Peirce, pragmaticism, despite his lofty interest in metaphysics, he's still just a pretty like down to earth empirical guy. Things are useful. That's the whole thing about pragmatism. Like, truth is use. Truth is not immediacy. Pure mediation is the process of use, the mediation of one thing for another. Does that make sense? I mean, like, that's clear to me. I'm not sure if that's clear to other people. Maybe I can rephrase it if that's in any way confusing. Let me know. So, sorry, continuing in the middle of that. The cultivated self-consciousness, which has traversed the world of self-alienated spirit, has, through its estrangement, generated the thing as its own self. If you think about pragmatism, right, it's all about not just that things are useful in general. Nobody cares about, because use is only useful like for me. Like whether it's useful for an animal or useful for like an unthinking thing. Use is only for thinking things. Well, it's only for desiring things. They don't have to necessarily have like conceptual thinking. You know, if thinking in the most broad, unspecific sense. But the pragmatist doesn't care about like things being useful for other beings. They only care about things being useful to me. So, you know, the cultivated self-consciousness, which has traversed the world of self-alienated spirit, has, through its estrangement, so in my estrangement I make the object as my own self. What I desire is merely my own satisfaction. And so what I create is just what is a means for me to get back to me. Because pleasure is nothing but the unity, the satisfaction, pleasure or satisfaction is nothing but the unity of myself with myself in my purpose. Let's see. How does this use orientation collapse in observing reason? Well, let's see. So therefore, it still retains its own self in it and knows the dependence of the thing, or it knows that the thing is essentially only being for another. Or to give complete expression to the relationship, that is, to what alone constitutes the nature of the object here, the thing counts for it as a being for itself. It proclaims sensory certainty as absolute truth, but it proclaims this very being for itself as a moment that merely vanishes and passes over into its contrary, into the surrendered being for another. So at this point, it seems that the collapse happens in the fact that it's being for itself. If the eye is an object, what was the being of the eye is a thing. So if the being of the eye is a thing, what I have before me is a thing, but I am a thing. The thing is for the thing, and so that's an immediacy that is sensuous. You know, it's just and he says it proclaims sensory certainty as absolute truth. So let's just read that. So to give complete expression to the relationship, that is, to what alone constitutes the nature of the object here, the thing counts for it as a being for itself. So the thing, the object, is independent. It's a being for itself. It proclaims sensory certainty as absolute truth. So it's independent on its own immediately. But it proclaims this very being for itself as a moment that merely vanishes and passes over into its contrary, into the surrendered being for another. And the being for another is both of the thing that's supposed to be independent, it's only for me, but also in some way I suppose that probably the return will be that I am also just only for it. It's my hypothesis there. Let's see how that works out. 792. In this, however, knowledge of the thing is still not complete. The thing must be known not only in the immediacy of its being and in its determinacy, but also as essence or interior, as the self. This occurs in moral self-consciousness. Moral self... Alright, so this already moves on to a different form of self-consciousness. Typical Hegel. Let's see. So, yeah, my guess is what I said. Probably in observing reason, that's what happens. That the thing is only an instrument. I also am an instrument, and pure instrumentality is mechanism or thinghood, which is just brings you back to just like the immediate thing. So insofar as there, like in instrumentality, there is the semblance well, it's not a semblance. The appearance of subjectivity, this appearance doesn't go towards this essence of subject. It just is reflected or remains on the surface as a thing. So in this, our knowledge is a thing is still not complete. The thing must be known not only on the immediacy of its being and its determinacy, but also as essence or interior as a self. So right, we went from there's the three moments. There's the immediate, there's the relationship, and there's the essential. So now we're going to the essential as a form of consciousness. This occurs in moral self-consciousness. Moral self-consciousness knows its own knowledge as the absolute essentiality, or it knows being simply as pure will or knowledge. It is nothing but this will and knowledge. Anything else has only unessential being, that is, not being that is in itself, only its empty husk. This is like the whole this is the Kantian worldview. You know, that you must do pure duty no matter what. It doesn't matter what the empirical consequences are or the reasons are. Duty is duty. You do it because duty is the ultimate reality. Everything else is unessential. So insofar as in its world representation, moral self-consciousness releases presence from the self. Presence is Dasein. It's a being there. You know, what is present is there. So insofar as in its world representation, moral self-consciousness releases presence from the self, it takes it back again into itself in equal measure. And what does it mean that it releases presence? Presence is also determinacy, by the way. So in its world representation, moral self-consciousness releases determinacy from itself, from the self. That it releases the self from having to have a necessary connection to the empirical, because the moral is in a way the only reality. I think this might be a kind of it is a reference to Kantianism, but it might also be more of a reference to Fichte. But it's just some vague recollections I have about what I know about Fichte. Like Fichte Fichte was more extreme than Kant. Fichte, there's a quote by Fichte, let me find it, where Fichte just says, well, you know, God just is the moral world order. Yes, the quote is, the living and efficaciously acting moral order is itself God. We require no other God, nor can we grasp any other. So, Fichte also says, there's no question about, whether a man can or can't do what is right. The question is always and only whether he will or they will, man in general. So, moral self-consciousness knows its own knowledge as the absolute essentiality. And its own knowledge here is the knowledge of duty. And duty is the ought, which is real, and the world is not as it ought to be. It is unreal. So that's why the world is only an empty husk, or the empirical world is only an empty husk. So insofar as in its world representation, moral self-consciousness releases presence from the self, determinacy from the self, it takes it back again into itself in equal measure. So in splitting the moral reality and the empirical reality, there's a release from presence, from determinacy, from having this relationship at all. But then it also has to take it back into itself. So finally, as conscience, it is no longer this incessantly alternating placing and shifting of presence and of the self. It knows that its presence is this pure certainty of itself. The objective element into which it ventures forth when it acts is nothing other than the self's pure knowledge of itself. My assumption is that the moral self-consciousness is probably split between the beautiful soul and something, and conscience in this case. Because the beautiful soul is I'm right, I'm good, I know what is good, this world sucks, everyone else sucks, I will do nothing because doing anything is imperfect, and they will just sully my beautiful, you know, purity of always being right and being judgmental that everyone else is wrong. Basically, Marxists, you know, Marxists and like very hyper-religious people. Particularly people of the Christian persuasion who think that, you know, by faith alone they are saved, and so they can go around and judge everyone else and do nothing on their own regarding, you know, being a moral person in the world. Does that make sense? Magnum Ozu. Is that clear?
Definitely makes sense. I've encountered those people, and I can be those people.
Yeah. So that's what it means, that, you know, that it's released from presence, it's released from relationship, determinacy, from being there in the fray, but also in conscience, it's also brought back into presence. So finally, as conscious, it is no longer this incessantly alternating placing and shifting of presence and of the self. It knows that its presence as such is this pure certainty of itself. The objective element into which it ventures forth when it acts is nothing other than the self's pure knowledge of itself. Typical Hegelese. So why would let me think about it. So consciousness is this incessantly, so finally, as conscience, it is no longer this incessantly alternating placing and shifting of presence of the self. So with conscience, you realize what is right and what is wrong. You realize that, you know, you need to do something. You need to right your wrongs, and so you actually do something, unlike the beautiful soul. There's probably quite a few other steps between that, but he's not mentioned them, and I haven't read them, but that makes sense to me. So before that, it's moving presence here and there, which also presence is itself, because presence is the division of this and not that, which is what the knower and the known, which is conscious, which is spirit, which is the self, which is the concept. So it knows that its presence as such is this pure certainty of itself. So why? Because presence as such, pure presence, is the this and not that, the knower, the known, which is conscious, which is the self, and what it knows is the this, which is not that, and the that is also this. So the self has the self before itself. So its presence is just the pure certainty of itself. Certainty here is just the pure relationship of knowledge, of knowing to the known in accord. Since they're the same, they have to be in accord because the self is the self. So the self's relationship to the self here is certainty itself. So the presence of consciousness is the pure certainty of itself, because it is a self-relationship. So the objective element into which it ventures forth when it acts is nothing other than the self's pure knowledge of itself. So the moral action, I suppose, the main purpose of the moral action is not to objectively right wrongs in things in the world. There are certain things that you break them and you can't unbreak them. So you can't be venturing into... So the objectivity you're venturing into can't be into like mere objects in the world. Mere objects mean like not things that are self-constituting and, you know, self-regenerating. The main reason you engage in morality is ultimately for your own sake, as much as the sake of others. The sake of others is your own sake. It is your own self-constitution. So the objective element to which conscious ventures forth when it acts is nothing other than the self's pure knowledge of itself. In that, you know, your conscious brings you to do what is right, but in doing what is right, you come into accord with your own knowledge of what is right, and so the objective element you've stepped in is not the empirical the empirical present world. Rather, the objective element you stepped into is the accord of well, the independence of moral knowledge. Makes sense? Hello, Ethan. For those of you watching on YouTube, please let me know, because stuff makes sense to me, but then people are like, well, I saw that and I didn't understand it. I'm like, why didn't you ask questions? Otherwise, we're moving to 793. So these are the moments of which the reconciliation of spirit with its own consciousness proper is composed. For themselves, they are individual, so each form of consciousness, and it is solely their spiritual unity that constitutes the force of this reconciliation. So each form of consciousness, like I said, is not aware of other forms of consciousness. But we know, as the phenomenologists, the phenomenological observers, that they have been developed out of each other, that they have an internal spiritual conceptual unity. So the last of these moments is, however, necessarily this unity itself, and as evident, in fact, it combines them all in itself. And we are thus here at the doorstep, because he has not been talking about absolute knowing yet. This is just a kind of blindingly fast formal recap of what's gone on before. But we have not even gotten to talking about pure absolute knowing yet, except once you know what absolute knowing is, I assure you, you will realize that the whole book has been talking about absolute knowing the entire time. It's simple. So simple that I got it without having read it. And that's the bet anyways. So the spirit that in its presence is certain of itself has for the element of presence nothing else but this knowledge of itself. The proclamation that it does what it does in accordance with conviction of duty. This language is the validity of its action. All right, see, there you go. So that's what conscience is. That just sounds weird. That's what conscience is. So action is the first separation, a separation that is in itself of the simplicity of the concept. So yeah, true. And the return out of this separation. So in action, I mean, and there's stuff in the preface that like directly implicates this. If you have, for example, if you have the indeterminate substrate of, reality, pure matter, say, the only way to get actions first, the only way to get like a distinction, which is separation, is the thing has to move, which is an action. Subjectivity, negation. So action is the first separation, a separation that is in itself of the simplicity of the concept and the return out of this separation. Action is the first separation, a separation that is in itself. I think I know what that means, but let me check the other translations. Sometimes these translations are like radically different. It's very rare, but Cambridge. Wow. Okay. So let me take a moment to complain about something. So it seems to me, because in other places, Dasein is this is Pinkart's translation, the Cambridge translation of the Phenomenology of Spirit. I've looked at the preface, particularly in the introduction, comparing these as I was doing the comments, my written commentary. For most of it, Pinkard translates Dasein as being there. Well, not being there. He translates it as determinate being. And sometimes he just translates it as is there, or, like X is there. Even though you could say X determinately is there, but, it's just the phrasing's better. But either way, it's all Dasein. Here, I know this is Dasein because the other one's translated as like being there. But he's translated here as existence. And that's just... It does not make that much of a big deal. Like, it's not that much of a difference. Except if existence is concrete existence, then it's a big deal because that has a definitely different flavor. It's much stronger than just Dasein. And it was, what was I checking? Action is the first separation. So acting is both the first division existing in itself of the simplicity of the concept and the return from out of this division. Okay, so action is the first separation, a separation that is in itself. Okay, yeah, that makes it clear. I mean, once you see it, you're like, okay, yeah, this... So the reference is that the first separation is action, not that action is the first separation. You can interpret it both ways, but it's definitely the other one. So the first separation is action, a separation that is in itself, so in the concept of the simplicity of the concept, and the return out of this separation. So action separates. So you're the conscientious actor. Your action creates a separation between the purity of your intent into the messiness of the world, but then the actuality of this action itself in being successful is also what unifies right back with your intent. And you are a moral person. Your conscience is satisfied. So this first movement veers around into the second, since the element of recognition posits itself as simple knowledge of duty in the face of the difference and division that lie in action as such, and in this way it forms an ironclad actuality confronting action. Thank you for the compliments on the eyebrows. I like my eyebrows too. So, but this movement. So let's see. So, but this first movement veers around into the second, since the element of recognition posits itself as simple knowledge of duty. So you act out in the world, which returns back to your knowledge of duty in the face of the difference and division that lie in action as such. And in this way it forms an ironclad actuality confronting action. This first movement veers around into the second. The element of recognition posits itself as simple knowledge of duty in the face of the difference division that lie in action as such. So it seems to me that this has to do with the fact, okay, you have a conscience, you act, but the fact that you have to act shows that there's a division between what is and what ought to be. And what is of such a nature that it may just be utterly, absolutely beyond your capacity to act to mend it. But in part, yes, that's it. That's exactly it. So you may have conscience, you may want to do the right thing, but there might be no empirical way for you to make amends for this. That like the world itself, actuality, just there's no way to make it bend. There's no way to undo what you've done. So, but in pardon, forgiveness, we saw how this harshness relents and estranges itself. Estrangement alienates itself, or lets go of itself. Here, therefore, actuality as well as immediate presence has for self-conscious no other significance than that of being pure knowing. Similarly, as determinate presence or as relationship, what stands opposed to itself is a knowing, partly of this purely individual self, partly of knowledge as universal. Okay. So in pardon, we saw how this harshness, so the fact that actualities become rigid in such a way that you cannot undo or change what you need to change. But pardon is this harshness relenting and straining itself. So the immovable object lets itself go and lets you pass it in a way, let's say. And indeed, it's the obstacle removing itself, and the obstacle has to be the one that removes itself. As far as persons go, you do something to a person that just there's no undoing it. You can't take second chances. It's a one and done. The only way for things to move forward is that this person forgives you. But once they forgive you, it's not something that you do. In truth, a lot of things that people show in media is that you have to do something to get forgiveness. But the truth of the matter is that that's not really the nature of forgiveness. The nature of forgiveness is entirely internally oriented to the person who forgives you, and there is no reason to forgive you other than that they decide to forgive you. It's not anything you can do. It's not even a specific reason they can give to themselves beyond that. Holding the grudge is itself just stupid and itself is an obstacle, which is empirically true. So here, therefore, actuality as well as immediate presence has for self-conscious no other significance than that of being pure knowing. So insofar as we're talking about a person, this makes sense, that the actuality being a person, which is the only thing that matters as the immediate presence of the world, as that person, that they become the entire object of what you're focused on. So it has for self-conscious no other significance than that of being pure knowing, because it's a person, they also know, so they're also self-conscious. Similarly, as determinate presence or as relationship, what stands opposed to itself is a knowing. So I am a knowing, they are a knowing, partly of this purely individual self, partly of knowledge as universal. So I'm a knowing, they are a knowing, we both know each other as knowing, and so that's the universality between us, or not between us, but the universality we partake in. So in this sense is posited at the same time that the third moment, the universality or essence, counts for each of the two opposed sides only as knowledge, and we are also acknowledged. And finally, these two sides equally upheave the empty oppositions to remaining and are the knowledge of I equals I. Sorry, let me reread that. So in this, there is posited at the same time that the third moment, the universality or essence, counts for each of the two opposed sides only as knowledge. And finally, these two sides equally upheave the empty oppositions to remaining and are the knowledge of I equals I, this individual self that is immediately pure knowledge of the universal. So that's not so clear. So let's see. Rereading it here from the pardon section again. So, but in pardon, we saw how this harshness relents and estranges itself. Here, therefore, actuality as well as immediate presence has for self-conscious no other significance than that of being pure knowing. So, in the event that I do something to somebody, right? Let's take that example. Can't undo it. my conscience is a guilty conscience. I want to make amends, but I can't. But the other person knows that I am sorry, that I do regret it, and they forgive me. So here, therefore, actuality, as well as the immediate presence, has for self-conscious no other significance than that of being pure knowing. So what makes the amends is just them knowing that I regret it in that scenario. I'm not saying that that's exactly what this is talking about. I'm trying to use a scenario to make sense of what's going on here. That kind of scenario makes sense. So similarly, as determinate presence or as relationship, what stands opposed to itself is a knowing. So because we're two knowers, partly of this purely individual self, partly of knowledge as universal. So we both know what is right. We both know what it takes or to make amends and what cannot be amended for, but also what is worth forgiving. So in this sense, there's positive at the same time that the third moment, the universality or essence, counts for each of the two opposed sides only as a knowledge. That I don't understand. If you got any ideas on that, let me know. So in this, there's positive at the same time that the third moment, the universality or essence, counts for each of the two opposed sides only as knowledge. Well, to put it back in that scenario, so we have the two knowers, we're knowings for each other. They know that I'm sorry. I know that they understand. In this, there's positive at the same time that the third moment, the universality or essence, counts for each of the two opposed sides only as knowledge. So we both know that we're unified in like regard to the truth of the matter. That we're trying to do what ought to. We are trying to bring about what ought to be. Either as the one who is conscientious and the one who forgives. That makes sense to me. So, and finally, these two sides equally upheave, off Haben. The empty oppositions still remaining and are the knowledge of I equals I. This individual self that is immediately pure knowledge or universal. So we come to accord with our own knowledge and our own knowing of each other and the reasons for why we're doing this, why we're engaging in this. And in that, we are the same. We're the same knowing and knower in that way. We're both self-consciousnesses. So finally, these two sides equally upheave. The empty oppositions to remaining are the knowledge of I equals I, this individual self. That is immediately pure knowledge or universal. Yeah, so in our knowledge, in our knowledge of the system of knowing which we are partaking in together, we share the same mind. We are basically the same I, and in that universal knowledge. So, insofar as I understand this and you understand this and we understand the same thing, we basically are the same I. Makes sense to me. What do you think, Magnum? Or Ozu?
Would this be called the spirit of the relationship?
Yeah, the knowledge, you can call it that, yeah.
The spirit of the community, perhaps.
Well, we said it's this individual self, but yeah, this individual self that is also the universal. That is what spirit is. It's the I that is a we that is an I.
That's some pretty solid stuff. Hey, by the way, this on my end, like on Discord, the stream just doesn't want to load. I don't know if it's for me. Like,
Let me restart it. I restarted. Okay. Stans Glocke asks, why does he say that the third moment is universality or essence? Are those just interchangeable when it comes to the truth of their shared knowledge, so to say? I hope that's clear. The reason why is because in the Phenomenology of Spirit, he does not make a technical distinction of these terms. Essence is talked about as the truth, the thing, the all-encompassing, reality. And so essence and the universal is also the all-encompassing. So, the essence can have multiple expressions. And so can the universal. So essence, universal, same thing. He's not being very strict about their distinctions. So yes, they're interchangeable in this case. As for, are those just interchangeable when it comes to the truth of their shared knowledge? I'm not sure what you mean by shared knowledge. Are you talking about the example of the shared knowledge of the two people in the relationship of forgiveness? Also, for those of you tuning in, and for you, Magnum, thank you for doing so, because this stuff really helps motivate me to actually get this stuff done. Otherwise, I kind of just do a little bit at a time. It's also difficult to get my mind thinking of certain things, especially of a non-technical thing, because there's stuff that makes sense to me, but it's very technical, and it takes me a while to get around to trying to process that in more normal everyday terms.
Yeah, man, it really is a pleasure. I wish I could ask more questions. But, reading all of this, it's really puts you in a dazzled state of just contemplation, right?
No, yeah. That's why I have to reread multiple times as we're doing this, because as I'm reading, I can't think about it, and so I have to take a second to reread it and pause. So somebody asks, I think he might also have some broader point in mind. He speaks about the reconciliation of consciousness and self-consciousness in the next paragraph. Is forgiveness only between literal people? Yeah, reconciliation he's talking about, it's not the forgiveness kind. It's just reconciling the fact that these are not all the same consciousness, the forms of consciousness. So this 794. This reconciliation of consciousness with self-consciousness thus shows itself as brought about from two sides, once in the religious spirit, and again in consciousness itself as such. So, what is? So the problem of the phenomenology at this point is, strangely, even though this is long past becoming self-conscious, consciousness, despite the fact that it is self-consciousness, remains trapped within consciousness. It still deals with everything as if it is not truly itself. And this is the case all the way up to here, up to absolute knowing. So consciousness, self-consciousness still is not is not one with consciousness, and even though it consciousness, the forms of consciousness are self-consciousness internally, implicitly, and even explicitly to a certain point, what they are is not yet reconciled with what they're doing, because what they're doing is not being self-conscious. So that's what needs to be reconciled. So there's what I am, there's what I do, my operations. These are not congruent. They're not coinciding as they should. Because if they were, then you would have self-consciousness of self-consciousness, which is not the case. What you have is self-consciousness operating under consciousness, occasionally being conscious of self-consciousness, but not conscious that that self-consciousness is its own. So that's like the problem with like the religion chapter. You end up with the ultimate self-consciousness, which is God, the ultimate subject, and yet, and it's absolute, so it should include me, and yet I don't treat it as if it includes me. So I think, reconciliation probably is a little bit of a nod to the moral standpoint, but also it's just talking about the structure. So I mean, like, if you notice that's why it took me a little bit to like parse out what's going on in that prior paragraph, because on the formal structural level, I know exactly what that's talking about. That's pretty clear to me. I was just trying to get on like, how do I understand this like on a more concrete like level. So there's reconciliation of consciousness with self-consciousness that shows itself as brought about from two sides, once in the religious spirit and again in consciousness itself as such. The difference between them is that the former is this reconciliation in the form of being in itself, the latter in the form of being for itself. So the former being religious spirit. So in religious spirit, the reconciliation is being in itself. And in consciousness, it is being for itself. In our consideration of them, they at first fall apart. In the order in which the shapes of consciousness came before us, consciousness arrived at the single moments of those shapes and at their unification long before religion too gave its object in the shape of actual self-consciousness. So let me just look at the general structure of course I don't have the bookmarks on this one. Forward, where's the table of contents? I want to see where consciousness is at, because I think the book is majorly it's the two major sections, consciousness and then self-conscious, and like all the other like sections are within self-consciousness. Contents, consciousness. Okay, no, they're not. So there's consciousness, self-consciousness, then reason. Most of the book is in reasons. So BCA. Structure is kind of weird. Reason, spirit. Okay, well, never mind that. So in our consideration then, they at first fall apart. In the order in which the shapes of consciousness came before us, consciousness arrived at the single moments of those shapes, and at their unification long before religion too gave its object the shape of actual self-consciousness. The unification of the two sides has not yet been exhibited. It is this that closes the series of the configurations of spirit, for in its spirit, which is the point of knowing itself, not only as it is in itself or according to its absolute content, nor only as it is for itself in its form devoid of content or on the side of self-consciousness, but it is in and for itself. All right, let's just read this again. Gilberto Gonzalez. In a movie, Dutton Ranch, the man tells his wife to forgive is not to receive, but only to give is to forgive. Yeah. So let me read that again. So this reconciliation of consciousness with self-consciousness that shows itself as brought about from two sides, once in the religious spirit and again in consciousness itself as such. not entirely sure which consciousness he's referring to, if it's just a section on consciousness. I'll assume that that's the case, but that's at the very beginning. And I mean, look, religion is at the very end, so well, yeah, that sure makes sense. I mean, those are the two extremes. Conscious with self-conscious. You would think that given the structure at reason, you already had the reconciliation with conscious with self-conscious, but that's not the case. Because everything still is within the mode of consciousness, even within self-consciousness, and even after it. So the difference between them is that the former is the reconciliation in the form of being in itself. All right, let me read this from the pink card 174. Okay. This reconciliation of consciousness with self-conscious is thereby shown to have been brought about from two sides at one time in the religious spirit and again in consciousness itself as such. They are differentiated from each other in that the former is a reconciliation in the form of being in itself, and the latter in the form of being for itself. As they have been examined, they initially come undone from each other. All right. So the main thing is I don't know what he was referring to here in consciousness itself. If it is that first section, or if it is about the thinker in that spirit, or if it is my thinking. Well, it would have to be something in that spirit, I suppose. I'll assume it's within that spirit. So they are different from each other in that the former is this reconciliation, the form of being in itself, that God is self-contained. The latter in the form of being for itself. So in our consideration of them, they at first fall apart in the order in which the shapes of consciousness came before us. Consciousness arrived at the single moments of those shapes. And at their unification, long before religion too gave its object the shape of actual self-consciousness. Consciousness arrived at the single moments in our consideration of them. In the order in which the shapes of consciousness came before us, consciousness arrived at the single moments of those shapes. And at the unification. Okay, so... yeah, okay, so I assume he's referring to the general consciousness of what we assume to be consciousness with a capital C in the entire phenomenology of spirit, which is all the spirit, which is just spirit in general. So consciousness as spirit in general, not a specific spirit, but just the spirit in general undergoing the experience of the phenomenology. It arrived at the single moments of those shapes of, both consciousness as just consciousness and self-consciousness. It arrived at consciousness, it went through self-conscious, it arrived at the unification, which is reason, long before religion, too, gave its object in the shape of self-conscious. Okay, yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it. The unification of the two sides has not yet been exhibited. It is this that closes the series of the configurations of spirit, for in it spirit reaches the point of knowing itself not only as it is in itself in accord to its absolute content, nor only as it is for itself in its form devoid of content or in the side of self-conscious, but as it is in and for itself. So we still have consciousness in general not yet unified with this, the religious spirit at the end, or rather consciousness is right at the beginning. It's the beginning portion of the phenomenology of spirit, and religion is at the ending portion. We've gotten to the end, but we haven't linked back to the beginning yet. So that's the unification he's talking about. It is odd to me that the difference between them is that the former being the religious spirit, It's the being in itself, and the latter is the being for itself, which is consciousness in general. I would have expected it's the inverse, but it also makes sense this way. Because consciousness is the one that's developed like throughout all of this, and the religious spirit only has this one moment of the contemplation of God, I suppose. I haven't read the religion section, so I don't know exactly all the details of what's going on there. I'm just kind of spitballing based on what's being said right here. But it's not too important. Like I said, the main thrust of all this is formality, so it's not necessary in the details. This is still only doing like the preliminary to just telling us what absolute knowing actually is. We still need, oh boy, like 3 more pages. I would have hoped it was shorter, because I want to get to there. It's 798 where it finally says, and now we talk about absolute knowing. So the difference between them is the former, reconciliation in the form of being in itself, the latter in the form of being for itself. Okay. So again, like spitballing, the being in itself for religion is God. For consciousness is being for itself. But being for itself in this phenomenology doesn't seem to have a clear meaning. It seems to be ambivalent. He uses it early on in consciousness to mean just like immediate self-consciousness, like I am I, as opposed to the things out there. So I am me, and not the things out there, not the rest of the world, etc. But that is not yet properly like complete being for itself. It's not like the proper infinite. C.F. George, what's the difference between this and Buddhist notions of the Tao? The difference is that this tells you what the Tao is. So it has very much this a dynamic flow and oppositionality and self-generation, just like the Tao does. But the Taoists will just tell you the Tao does this, in a sequence, but they don't explain it. Hegel actually explains it. It's pretty clear. It's clear once you get the flow of it. Once you get in a flow state of thinking. All right. So consciousness is the reconciliation in being for itself only, and this is incomplete, precisely because it still excludes being for other. So being for itself, being itself, being for other is still the same thing. Each of these is excluding something. Yes, actually, each of these excludes the other. Not each other. Not that being for itself excludes being in itself, but rather that both of them exclude being for other. So in our consideration of them, they first fall apart. The order already we know. The unification of the two sides is not yet being exhibited. Is this that closes the series? Okay, the closure. I already mentioned it, that we've gotten to the end, but the end has not yet connected itself to the beginning, which is the immediacy of self-certainty. For in the spirit reaches the point of knowing itself. It is this that closes the series of the configurations of spirit. For in its spirit reaches the point of knowing itself. Take that in a cheeky way. In its spirit reaches a point of knowing spirit, but also it reaches a point of knowing. So knowing itself, knowledge itself. So not only as it is in itself, or in accord, or according to its absolute content, so just substance, nor only as it is for itself in its form devoid of content, or on the side of self-consciousness, so on the pure formal side. The for itself of consciousness, since consciousness is knowing, the knower, and the knower is a knowing. So here it's telling you that the for itself is the focus on the epistemic formality of how I know something. Not what I know, but how I know. So that's why it's devoid of content. But as it is in and for itself, so it's both formal and contentful. It's both subjective and substantive and objective. Is that clear? Anyways, continue 795. That's a long one. This unification has, however, already happened in itself, and that too in religion, in the return of representation into self-consciousness, but not in the proper form, for the religious side is the side of the in itself, which stands over against the movement of self-consciousness. Don't worry too much about what that means. Consequently, the unification belongs to this other side, which by contrast is the side of reflection into itself, and therefore the side that contains both itself and its contrary, and not only in itself or in a universal way, but for itself or in a developed and differentiated way. Okay. So that has already happened in itself. It means that the substance of what has happened, what has been done, already has this answer, like, it has it in it. It's already been done. We just consciousness is just not yet aware of what it's done, but it has been done. So that's what it means that it's in itself. So in the return of representation into self-consciousness, I'm not sure what that's about. It's probably something very specific to that form of consciousness. But not in the proper form, for the religious side is the side of the in itself, which stands over against the movement of self-consciousness. So in the religious side, God is the absolute, is beyond anything that we can understand, I suppose. That's the assumption, because that which is purely in itself is that which is outside of consciousness and self-conscious alike. Because the assumption is that it's the Kantian problem. It's the thing in itself, and all that consciousness and self-conscious have access to are phenomena. So it's the in itself which stands over against the movement of self-conscious. Yeah, that's exactly what it's referring to. So consequently, the unification belongs to this other side, by contrast, which by contrast is the side of reflection into itself, and therefore the side that contains both itself and its contrary, and not only in itself or in a universal way, but for itself or in a developed and differentiated way. So basically, the process has been going on up till now, has been, this has actually gone over in the Force and Understanding chapter at the very end. It's the whole inverted consciousness thing, the inverted world argument. This first stuff between the religious spirit and consciousness is the difference between the in itself, the thing, and consciousness here, and they're completely worlds apart. The thing and its identity and difference. And the thing you got to do is you got to get the difference of difference, absolute difference, because the absolute difference can get you, the difference of difference is identity, and what is different to identity is difference. Or what identity is itself is identical through the relationship of being different to itself in order to relate back to itself. And so that absolute difference, he says, the side of reflection into itself, it's a reflection of reflection, and therefore the side that contains both itself and its contrary. The contrary is the reflection. You reflect the positive and the negative opposites. That's what it's referring to. And so it's not only in itself. So it's the in itself is that which is unexpressed. So it's a merely universal without details. But for itself, the for itself is that which is expressed. So it is developed in a differentiated way. So rather than having an empty nothing, we have a differentiated concrete being. See if George asks, Hegel says sublation, sublimation, but does he ever say sublime like Zizek or whatever? No. Hegel does not say sublimation. I mean, he doesn't say sublation either. It's like the German word is Aufhebung, and it's just a regular word. That's why I use upheave. I don't use sublation. Upheave has the sense of the regular upheaval. It has a sense of lifting, as heaving up, lifting up. And in heaving something, you're holding it, you're upholding it. So there's a preservation. So you have upholding, and you also have uptaking. Uptaking is not part of Aufhebung in regular German. Hegel adds that as a fourth meaning, and it's also obviously not part of neither upholding nor uptaking are part of upheaving in English. But if you upheave something to yourself, you uplift something to yourself, you're also uptaking it. So let's see. So the content as well as the other side of self-conscious spirit, insofar as it is the other side, has been present and exhibited in its completeness. The unification that is still lacking is the simple unity of the concept. So at this point in the phenomenology of spirit, we have like the pure in itself content of God, and we have the pure for itself form of consciousness. Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that, Georgia, that upheaval has the direct connotations of change or becoming, whereas sublation does not. Sublation is just like a made-up word, man. All right, so we have the pure in itself, or the purified in itself, and we have like the purified for itself, pure content, pure form. We need to bring them together. That's what's happening in this final chapter. And that's what the concept is. So the concept too is itself already present on the side of self-consciousness. The concept is present on both the objective, the in itself, and the for itself, the side of self-conscious. But as it has come before us thus far, it has, like all the other moments, the form of being a particular shape of consciousness. Okay, that's interesting. So we had the object already appear as a shape of consciousness. We have the concept now appear as a shape of consciousness. And I assume that he's going to say that the appearance of the concept as a particular shape of consciousness is absolute knowing. That's my guess, but I just see now, I glanced it, I'm wrong. But let's see. So it is therefore that part of the shape of spirit, certain of itself, that remains within its concept and was called the beautiful soul. Well, dang it, I was wrong. It's rare, but it happens. I would not have expected that. Although, I mean, okay. It makes perfect sense, and this is why, like, you got to take Hegel on like so many layers of meaning. Did you know that conceited is rooted in concept? It's same root. The reason somebody is conceited is because they're entirely within themselves. They're full of themselves. That's what conceit is. And what is the concept? Well, the concept is that which is self-related and self-grasping. They're in the somebody conceited is completely within their grasp of themselves. They hold closely to themselves only. They're the only thing that they value. And that's exactly what the beautiful soul is. The beautiful soul is conceited. It is the moral consciousness in which, I am right and everybody else is wrong, and I don't have to do a thing because the objective world is garbage. Everything's wrong with it. It's imperfect. Everyone else out there is imperfect. But in me, inside of this little beautiful mind and this beautiful soul, everything is nice, pristine, and perfect, and nothing ever goes wrong. Nothing ever changes. Nothing ever gets done. That is to say, the beautiful soul is its own knowledge of itself in its pure, transparent unity, the self-consciousness that knows as spirit this pure knowledge of pure being within self. Not only the intuition of the divine, but the divine's intuition of itself. Birdie high praise. Since this concept remains firmly opposed to its realization, so like the beautiful soul is entirely opposed to like objectivity, it is the one-sided shape in which we saw vanish. It is the one-sided shape which we saw vanish into thin air, but we also saw its positive estrangement and progression. So, the beautiful soul undoes itself in a way, it upheaves itself. So through this realization, the self-absorption of this objectless self-consciousness, the determinacy of the concept in the face of its fulfillment, upheaves itself. Its self-consciousness acquires the form of universality, and what remains to self-consciousness is its genuine concept, or the concept that has acquired its realization. It is a concept in its truth, that is, in its unity with its estrangement, the knowledge of pure knowledge, not as the abstract essence that is duty, but of knowledge as the essence that is this knowledge, this pure self-consciousness that is therefore at the same time a genuine object, for the object is the self that is for itself. I don't know about you, but there's an art to making long sentences that could be broken up into, shorter sentences. But I like it. Yeah. You run these things through an AI and they're like, you could improve this by, just like breaking this up like 4 sentences. How about no? Because the main thing is like, it's just like paragraphs, right? Like the whole thing about paragraphs are kind of be like, it's like one theme, one concept that you're going with. And a sentence is just like a sub moment of that concept. But sometimes that moment is a very long moment, and that's just how it is. And you want people to know, like, this is all directly together. This is all one thought. That's why, you don't put the period until the end, but you can break it up with semicolons and whatnot. Colons and semicolons. I like to use them. I like my long sentences. So, just a little bit about myself there. Let's reread that. All right. So, through this realization, the self-absorption of this objectless self-consciousness, the determinacy of the concept in the face of its fulfillment, upheaves itself. So, what's he referring to there? Let me see. Let's read the pink card version, 795. See, the beautiful soul is its own knowing of itself in its pure transparent unity. The self-conscious that knows its pure knowing of pure inwardly turned being as spirit, not only the intuition of divine, but divine self-intuition. While this concept steadfastly shows itself in opposition to its realization, it is the one-sided shape which we saw not only disappear into thin air, but also positively relinquish itself and move forward. Through this realization, the steadfast insistence on oneself on the part of that objectless self-consciousness, or the determinants of the concept in contrast to its fulfillment, is sublated, is upheaved. It is self-conscious. Its self-conscious achieves the form of universality, and what remains for it is its genuine true concept, the concept which has attained its realization. That self-conscious is the concept in its truth, or in the unity with its self-relinquishing. Okay. Let me read that. So, through this realization, the self-absorption, this objectless self-consciousness, the determinacy of the concept in the face of its fulfillment. So, the determinacy is the opposition of fulfillment, the opposition of concept, and the fact that it's not fulfilled, because the concept is just a mere concept. It's only in my mind. It's only my beautiful inert soul. But the world out there is the actuality, and that's where fulfillment is at. So, there's the determinate relationship, the distinction between the concept and its fulfillment. So, this itself upheaves the purity of the concept. Its self-consciousness acquires the form of universality, and what remains to self-consciousness is its genuine concept, or the concept that has acquired its realization. It is the concept in its truth, that is, in its unity with its estrangement. Okay, so the truth of the beautiful soul is this estrangement of concept and fulfillment. That estrangement, that direction, that movement of, splitting apart, That is the truth of the concept. So he says, it is the concept in its truth, that is in unity with its estrangement, the knowledge of pure knowledge, not as the abstract essence that is duty, but of knowledge as the essence that is this knowledge, this pure self-consciousness. And by the way, that direction, the structure between the concept and the objectivity out there, the fulfillment, that is just a structure of the knowing and the known. Yet again, the subject and the object. So that's why he then goes back to says like the knowledge of pure knowledge. So in the direction between the concept and the object is just the concept. So I have the knowledge of knowledge, or the concept of the concept in this case, not as an abstract essence that is duty, but of knowledge as the essence that is this knowledge, this pure self-consciousness that is therefore at the same time a genuine object, for the object is the self that is for itself. So we just repeat that structure again. I know what I just said, but let me know if that was intelligible. Because how else he put it? I mean, like another way to put it is the beautiful soul is somebody who's just conceited in their own morality, that they don't they're always right because they never do anything themselves. The very distinction between the fact that morality cannot be realized and here's the real world, that very direction is their knowledge, and they are satisfied in knowing this direction, but in doing that they themselves are directed from the very ideal that they have. Like the ideal of morality is, let's say, self-unified thing, but then if that's the truth, the very fact that my knowledge of it is a direction of something disunified, I am myself that direction of the disunification of object and concept, but that direction is itself what the beautiful soul is, and that's why it is the knowledge of the self that's why the self becomes for itself in that structure, if that makes any sense. I hope that makes sense. But anyways, we have been going on for 2 hours, and I am hungry. Somebody asked, George, is he subtweeting Kant with the beautiful soul? No, the beautiful soul is something else. It's not a particular philosopher, as far as I know. The beautiful soul is an attitude. I think that's kind of like more hinting at certain romantics, and so I don't think there's any philosophy that really fits this. Well, actually, no, it's too much to say that there's a lot of garbage philosophy out there, so there's probably some philosophy that does fit this. But the beautiful soul is more just a form of consciousness that you just find in the everyday world. I mean, you've met people like this. I've met people like this. Maybe you've been a person like this. You're not gonna deny. I've been that person once in a while. Before, particularly with Marxists, for example, the no true communism. Like left communists, for example, particularly communization theorists, and more like philosophical Marxists, they are totally this way, in which, like any real existing socialism, they just did it wrong, okay? Nobody's ever done socialism right. Nobody's ever done communism right. Nobody's done communist theory correctly. Therefore, communism is still perfect and pristine and true. And I am right for saying that everyone else is wrong because they don't adhere to my brand of non-existent communism. The divine's intuition of itself. Well, that one's kind of obvious because, like, the whole reason that the beautiful soul is conceited is because, like, well, it believes that this view that it has of the truth is the truth, and it believes that it itself is one with the truth in, you know, being the beautiful soul. Because each of these is taking, like, their view as absolute, the object as absolute, and that's why I said, like, I quoted the Fichte quote. Let me get it again. So Fichte says, quote, "The living and efficaciously acting moral order is itself God. We require no other God, nor can we grasp any other." But Fichte says it's the living, the acting and efficacious moral order. So, like, Fichte is against the beautiful soul. The beautiful soul is more of a Kantian, in which, like, it's the moral order is this purely intellectual ought that doesn't exist and can't exist. But all right, 796. There's only about 10 more paragraphs left, but they're long. And I wanted to make it all the way to 798, but I'm really hungry. I don't know. Can we go? All right, let's power through, because 797 is really short. All right, 796. This concept gained its fulfillment on the one hand in the action of spirit CERN of itself, and on the other in religion. So, you know, just talking about the concept. Still doing the recap. We're like, for all that we've done so far, all of this is not yet the argument for what absolute knowing is. This is just recap of things that are directly bringing us to the clash that absolute knowing is required for. So this concept gains fulfillment on the one hand, the action of spirit CERN of itself, and on the other in religion. In religion, the concept acquired the absolute content as content, or content in the form of representation, in the form of otherness for consciousness. In the shape of the acting spirit, by contrast, the form is the self itself, for it contains the self-certain spirit in action. The self accomplishes the life of absolute spirit. This shape is, as we see, that simple concept which, however, abandons its eternal essence, is there. When it says is there, that also means it's present. Dasein, or acts. The division or emergence stems from the purity of the concept, for this purity is the absolute abstraction or negativity. So look at that, absolute abstraction. So the concept is considered pure by the by the beautiful soul, in that, like, the concept is completely abstract. It's completely unrelated to anything else. It's not touched by anything else. But then that's also just pure negativity. Similarly, the concept has the element of its actuality, or is the being it contains, in pure knowledge itself. For this pure knowledge is the simple immediacy that is being and presence as well as essence, the former negative thinking, the latter positive thinking itself. So let's see. So it's so being and presence as well as essence. So being is negative thinking. Presence is positive thinking, or essence is positive thinking. This is funny because in the logical form, they're completely they're kind of inverted. Because essence is even more negative than being. Essence is absolute negativity. And being is the positive being. In the worst sense. Positive in, like, it's just kind of put there. Finally, this presence is just as much the reflectedness into itself out of pure knowledge, both as presence and as duty, or the state of evil. So I know he talks about this in, like, ethical life. Well, it's the whole section of, like, the beautiful soul, and it's in morality. You can kind of get a sense of what's going on here. Like I said, like, in these, it's not so important to get the general structural details. because they're not the thing. They're not the thing that's important in this chapter. But still, I'm reading it just to make sure. So let's see. So religion has the content of the absolute. The beautiful soul, or morality, here has the action of the absolute. The shape is as we see it, the simple concept, the eternal essence is there, blah, blah, blah. Alright, so finally, this presence is just as much the reflectedness into itself out of pure knowledge, both as presence and as duty, or the state of evil. So in the fact that, the consciousness goes into itself, away from the reality or pure knowledge, it is evil. This withdrawal into itself constitutes the opposition of the concept and is thus the emergence of the pure knowledge of the essence, a knowing without action and without actuality. So this withdrawal into itself constitutes the opposition of the concept and is thus the emergence of the pure knowledge of the essence. A knowing without action and without actuality. But its emergence in this opposition is participation in it. The pure knowledge of essence has in itself estranged its simple unity, for it is the division or the negativity that the concept is. Insofar as this division is the becoming for itself, it is evil. Insofar as it is the in itself, it is what remains good. Okay, so evil is an opposition, that's clear. Withdrawal into itself constitutes the opposition of the concept. So this is the opposition both of the concept to the objective, but it's also the opposition which the whole form of consciousness is, which it is the concept. So it's the opposition within the concept as well. That the concept is this opposition to the thing as well. Or just opposition in general, really. All distinction, presence. So in is thus the emergence of the pure knowledge of the essence. So insofar as we take it as the totality of the process, where the distinction is being made, it is a genuine knowledge, it is a pure knowledge of the essence, a knowing without action and without actuality. Okay, so going back to the moral example, insofar as consciousness is retreating back into itself, and knows the opposition between its inner and its being and its outer as a beautiful soul. It's a knowing without action and without actuality. So it knows, and it knows the essence. It knows the thing, but it doesn't act to do what it ought to do. Its emergence in this opposition is participation in it. So it tries to withdraw from opposition into itself. But in withdrawing, it is opposing itself. So it's participating in the opposition. The pure knowledge of essence has in itself estranged its simple unity, so it's trying to go into the simple unity of essence, but that itself is distinguished in being oppositional to what is not essential, for it is the division or the negativity that the concept is. So the concept includes all of this. Insofar as this division is the becoming for itself, it is evil. Not sure what becoming for itself particularly has to do with this. Well, I mean, like, the becoming part is not that important. Evil is what is finitude or self-conscious, finite self-consciousness, which makes itself its own end as finite against the infinite. So insofar as it's even not fully finite or trying to be entirely fully for itself, but it's becoming for itself, that is evil. And like that's why the beautiful soul in a certain way is evil. Somebody who knows what is right but doesn't act to do anything is themselves evil. So insofar as it is the in itself, it is what remains good. So the in itself is the objective. It's the thing in itself. It's the true. It is what actually is. And that's in classical metaphysics, that's identified as the good. So now what at first happens in itself is at the same time for consciousness and is likewise itself duplicated. It is both for consciousness and also its being for itself or its own doing. Alright, so let's reread that again. So now what at first happens in itself is at the same time for consciousness and is likewise itself duplicated. So consciousness is aware of what's happening in it, which is a distinction in it, which also duplicates it. So what's happening here? So what's happening is we've made the retreat into oneself. This itself is like knowledge, which is a distinction within consciousness, which is a split within consciousness. So it's duplicated. Consciousness is the movement back into itself, away from the world. But it's aware of this. So it is both for consciousness. So it is both for consciousness and also it's being for itself or its own doing. The same thing that is already posited in itself now therefore repeats itself as conscious knowledge of it and as conscious doing. So there's the doing, there's the knowing of doing, the knowing of what we do. Each party abandons for the other the independence of the determinacy in which it enters the list against it. This abandonment is the same renunciation of the one-sidedness of the concept that in itself constituted the beginning, but it is now its own renunciation, just as the concept which it renounces is its own concept. This in itself of the beginning is in truth as negativity equally the mediated in itself, and so it now posits itself as it is in truth, and the negative is as its determinacy of each other for the other, and is in itself the self-upheaving in itself. Okay, he's lost me. So he's referring to stuff about structures and forms of consciousness that are already clearly being gone over. But I have no idea what these are. So right now we went from the beautiful soul to kind of a moral acting consciousness. This consciousness kind of like repeating some of the problems with the beautiful soul and going back into itself and trying to like encapsulate itself, to be conceited, to be grasped within its own concept and enclosed in it against the objective world. But now he's referring to renunciation. I mean, I know that's part of the religion section. Actually, it's not just part of the religion section, that's part of the unhappy consciousness as well. So the same thing is already posited in innocence. So this structure of distinction within consciousness, although that's pretty clear to me, I know exactly what that's about. It's these details of what specific consciousness he's talking about that I'm not clear about. Because all of a sudden, there's a split in consciousness. It's duplicated. So in it's duplicated, then we have two consciousness. So it is both it's a consciousness of the for consciousness, and it's also a consciousness of being for itself or its own doing. So there's the action, there's the knowledge. It's the same thing that's already posited in itself, now therefore repeats itself as conscious knowledge of it and its conscious doing. Each party, and now it's like the doing and the knowing are now like two consciousnesses, abandons for the other the independence of the determinacy, or party doesn't have to be people or consciousness, but just part. But it would say part if it wasn't. It would say part if it's just a thing, but a party is a person, a consciousness. So we have two consciousnesses. Each one abandons for the other the independence of the determinacy in which it enters the lists against it. And so the lists against it is, I suppose, like they got grievances. You did this to me, I did this to you. This abandonment. So each party abandons for the other the independence of the determinacy in which it enters the lists against it. So they're not independent from each other, dependent because of their grievances. This abandonment is the same renunciation of the one-sidedness of the concept that in itself constituted the beginning. So the concept is there's a renunciation of the one-sidedness of the concept, which in itself constituted the beginning, but didn't for itself. But it is now its own renunciation, just as the concept which it renounces is its own concept. So they're independent, they renounce being independent. That renunciation of independence is itself the renunciation of the concept, because the concept also does this. So just as the concept which it renounces is its own concept, I assume that the concept renounces the concept of the object, or the grievances it has against the other person. I'm just trying to bring together this metaphor he's giving. This in itself of the beginning is in truth as negativity equally the mediated in itself, and so it now posits itself as it is in truth, and the negative is as determinacy of each for the other is in itself the self-upheaving in itself. Let's see. So we went from evil to this, and so what's developing here is we have an evil consciousness, but in order to have an evil consciousness, we have to have the split. But the split means that there's two consciousnesses, which are now blaming each other for something. But the whole point of becoming for oneself is that you're independent, that's exactly what makes the whole selfishness of evil. But now, since they've got grievances against each other and they can't split, they know that they're connected by determinacy itself, their own presence to each other requires a connection, so they can't be ripped apart in that way ontologically. They renounce their independence. They renounce the absolute independence of their grievances against each other. This is also the renouncing of the concept of what they believe about each other, and this is also the renunciation of the concept itself, because the concept is a unity which also lets itself go into difference. Universality goes into particularity, or presence, Dasein. So the concept which renounces its own concept, so this in itself is the beginning, is in truth, as negativity equally the mediated in itself. So the in itself of the concept is the beginning. It's the not yet expressed. It's the implicit. It's itself a negativity, which equally is mediated in itself. So mediation is a difference, distinction, becoming. And so it now posits itself as it is in truth. So when this whole process is grasped as a whole, of this letting go and coming back together as independence, God, that's so weird. Independent persons or independent consciousness in dependence to each other. And so it now posits itself as it is in truth, and negative as is, and the negative is as determinacy of each for the other, and is in itself the self-upheaving in itself. So through their negativity, they determine each other. The negation, what is supposed to be normally evil, the separation, is none of the self the thing that gives them positive being as independent in the first place, as distinct, as being in themselves. So the determinacy or the negativity is the upheaval of the whole process. We have the immediacy, and wait, no, we got mediation. Wait, no, we got self-mediation. No, we got self-mediation as the whole thing. That's the concept. That's a whole bunch of nerd jargon, I suppose. Let me know if that makes any sense. And there we go. We're almost done. By the way, if you're watching, this is the first time I'm reading this, so I'm working this out as I'm going along. So forgive me for things that are unintelligible. This is not a part of the official reading group playlist or the commentary playlist. I just wanted to do this to get this done today. Force myself to get it done. So one of the two parts of the opposition is the disparity between the being within itself, in its individuality, and the universality. That's right. So you have the distinction of individuality, universality. The other is the disparity between its abstract universality and the self, because the self is concrete, and here it's present. The former dies away to its being for itself and estranges itself, makes its confession. All right, so what's the former? So one of the two parts of the opposition is the disparity between the being within itself and its individuality and the universality. The other is the disparity between its abstract universality and the self. Okay. So the individuality as being within self dies away to its being for itself, and estranges itself, makes its confession. Okay, so these two people have grievances. They haven't yet come to express this to each other. Like, they both have grievances against each other, but like they've not yet made amends. They're still within themselves. To be within themselves, to be independent, individuality. They're not yet in universality. They're not unified. So as being within themselves dies away to being for itself, in that they're present to each other as conscious to consciousness, self-conscious to self-consciousness. So you go from the abstract immediacy to the relationship, which is being here, being is for what? Being, which is being for itself. So, and that in this case is confession. I become, we're both guilty, and I confess my guilt to you, you confess your guilt to me. The latter renounces the harshness of its abstract universality, and in so doing dies away to its lifeless self and to its unmoved universality, and so they forgive. The former has thus completed itself through the movement to universality, that is essence, and the latter through universality, that is self. Through this movement of action, spirit, which is only spirit in being there, in elevating its presence into... Okay, so I hate that. So, spirit in being there is presence, which is spirit, which is only spirit in presence, or in that... that's just what it means. It's there. That's distinct from other things. It's this as opposed to not that. In elevating its presence into thought, and thereby into absolute opposition, and in returning from this opposition through and in this opposition itself, spirit has emerged as pure universality of knowing, which is self-consciousness, as self-consciousness, that is the simple unity of knowing. Okay, that's a much easier to follow paragraph. So we have two sides of the split between the guilty party and the aggrieved party. And there's the person who's going to confess and the person who's going to forgive. So the person who's going to be confessing is the being in itself that committed evil in its individuality, hasn't come to universality. And the other one is the abstract universality that is also in itself, and is the judging self. The former dies away in confession. The latter renounces the harshness of its abstract universality, because the abstract universal rejects all distinctions. It's the inflexible law. Let's say, there's no there's nothing to quibble in the law. The law is the law, and I apply the law exactly as the law says. But this harshness of its abstract universality is renounced, and in so doing dies away to its lifeless self and to its unmoved universality. So insofar as there's a rigidity in which you only follow the law strictly, there is no room there for yourself to live. We have this in the United States in which, I forget what there's a specific name for this, in which the judge has no leeway to change the sentences. I think it's just mandatory sentences. So you do a crime, doesn't matter why you did it, doesn't matter how you did it, doesn't matter if it was a little, if it was a lot. If it's the crime, it's the crime, and you get exactly this number of years, regardless how much sentence it is. And the judge is by law required to just sentence you to that. Even if they think it's unjust, they still have to do it. So there's the self is dead there, and the law is dead there, because neither of them move. And to move, to change, to budge is to be alive. So in removing the harshness, in forgiving, or in being soft to the one who confesses the wrongs, the universal becomes particularized, individualized, and it's also the case that the self now has a place to move. So the former, the one who confesses, has thus completed itself through the moment of universality, that is essence, and the latter through universality, that is self. So being within self, or the being in itself, or the in itself, is the essence. And so because the main one that's acting there, or at least on the immediate sense, the main one that acts there is the one that confesses, because they're the ones who did something, but they don't have the power to do anything on the moral level, except for the one that's going to either punish them or forgive them, and that's why the second one is the one that's has the self, and the first one has the essence. So they completed themselves through that. So through this movement of action, spirit, which is only spirit in presence, in elevating its presence into thoughts, because they've come into unity, so they've become universal. They've also expressed to each other in, language, in speech. They've confessed, and they've renounced. So in elevating its presence to thought, and thereby into absolute opposition. All right, it seems like we're back up. All right, let me just finish this. So we're wearing it seems that my router is bugging out. So I was explaining, let's see, through this movement of action, spirit, which is only spirit in presence, in elevating its presence into thought, and thereby into absolute opposition, and in returning to this from this opposition through and in this opposition itself, spirit has emerged as pure universality of knowing, which is self-conscious, as self-conscious, that is the simple unity of knowing. Not only have these two people being split by being separate knowers, they have also come into a clash because of their own self-internal worldviews, or self-internally aimed worldviews. But in